This is your captain speaking. My name is Taylor Morgan. I am a CrossFit Level 2 trainer, and I am dedicated to helping you improve your life. I created the Captain's Lifestyle because I wanted to help as many people as possible. We cover topics ranging from fitness, nutrition, recovery, mindset, and more. If you're content with settling for average, then walk the plank. But if you're ready to become the captain of your own life, welcome aboard. Hello, and welcome to the 10th episode of the Captain's Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Captain Morgan. On this podcast, I don't have any special guest with me, so we're doing it solo, my first solo podcast. This podcast is going to be on eggs and meat, and why they are good for you, and why some people think that they are not good for you. But first off, I would like to give a shout out to my best friend, Will. He sent me, or he gave it to me, delivered it in person, this mug, Podcats. I don't know if you can see that, but so I filled it with milk because I felt weird drinking water out of a coffee mug because I don't drink coffee. But yes, thank you, Will. All right, so let's jump right into it. Something I want to preface this podcast with is all of this information that I got for the podcast is all free knowledge. Like, you can go look this up yourself. So mainly I use PubMed, which is probably the best source to get it from. And also, for the meat, I did like an 8-minute long speech on grass-fed meat in one of my college classes. So I had all that information, which I got from PubMed. So my point being is that you can find all this information on your own. Don't believe everything you see in the news or like some article in some magazine, some like groundbreaking study or whatever. Make sure you check the facts, okay? Because if something comes out and says, like, declares something as bad, it's probably not true. It's like nutrition especially is completely individual and it's always changing. So just make sure to do your own research. Don't just trust what someone says, okay? So yeah, if you've heard that eggs, we'll start with eggs. If you've heard that eggs are bad for you because of cholesterol, let me tell you where that study comes from. So that study was based on a recommendation from 1968 from the American Heart Association, and they based their recommendation that you should have less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol on studies that they did in rabbits. And the problem with that is that rabbits are not carnivores or omnivores. They're herbivores, right? So they don't eat any meat. So the problem with giving a rabbit cholesterol is that it doesn't have the digestive system to process cholesterol. So of course it's not going to be good for the rabbits, and it increased their risk of heart disease. So right off the bat, it's not a good idea. Yet the American Heart Association declared to eat less cholesterol. So that's where it comes from, all the way back in 1968. So this is a study that was done in 2015, and some of this is going to be just quoted directly from the study. It says that in the long run, it turned out that not only was a recommendation based on misunderstood data, what I said with the rabbits, and effectively useless, it actually did damage to the general public in terms of their nutritional needs. So going from the traditional egg breakfast, which is what a lot of people had at the time, to, I'll quote from the study again, the 5-decade-long shift from eggs for breakfast to carbohydrate-rich cereals might not have been the best approach to weight maintenance and probably contributed to our national obesity problem. which 100% it did. If you go from eating eggs, which is a real food, to carbohydrate cereals, which every cereal is a carbohydrate. It's based on a grain, either like rice or wheat, all carbohydrates. Obviously, that's not good for you because it's processed and high glycemic carbohydrates. So cereal should not be your breakfast, all right? It also goes on to say that while the U.S. continued to recommend limits on dietary cholesterol, a large number of countries removed dietary cholesterol restrictions from their national dietary guidelines. So some of those countries include Australia, Great Britain, and Ireland. And we, meaning the United States, was approximately the last country to finally say that, okay, yeah, we were wrong about the cholesterol, even though that we were the ones who came out and said that you shouldn't eat cholesterol in the first place. It took us a little bit longer to admit our mistake. So, eggs are good for you, okay? They're high in protein, they're high in fat. So I'm not going to go into like everything that an egg has. That is very common knowledge that anybody can just go look up. So some of the things that I will cover are, I guess we'll go into the cholesterol myth right now. So my good friend Holly has a nutrition blog that she writes, obviously. And so I got early access to that because it just so happens that Monday's blog post is titled The Cholesterol Conundrum. Okay. So it's a fantastic article. I highly recommend going to check it out. But she's basically saying everything that I am. So it says that a study done in 2018 out of the University of Los Angeles, so UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, they examined over 100,000 heart attack cases, and about 75% of those cases were all within healthy cholesterol range. So if high cholesterol means a higher risk of cardiovascular disease, why were 75% of the people that had heart attacks within healthy cholesterol ranges, right? It just doesn't make sense because dietary cholesterol does not have much correlation with blood cholesterol. So meaning if you ingest dietary cholesterol, that doesn't mean that it makes it into your bloodstream and becomes blood cholesterol, okay? So other things that can affect your cholesterol, besides dietary cholesterol, things like stress, activities, your eating habits, and triglycerides. So triglycerides, just fat. How much fat are you eating? If you're eating bad fat, that's probably not a good thing. We'll go into that on a different podcast, difference between good and bad fats. So I used to think that eating egg whites was healthy, so minus the egg yolk. And probably a lot of people still think that, which, I mean, if you do the research, is just not true. The egg yolk is probably the best part of the egg, right? That's where all the good stuff is. So in Holly's article, she says that if you're skipping out on the egg yolk, then you're also missing vitamins A, D, E, and K, along with omega-3 fats, which are the good fats, as well as folate, choline, and vitamin B12. And they're also packed with amino acids, which help prevent heart disease. Amino acids reduce, DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, and help to increase protein synthesis, muscle protein synthesis. So all good things come from the egg yolk. Okay, there's nothing wrong with egg yolk. Eat your egg yolks. Don't just go with egg whites just because you heard that it's healthy. All right. So some things that I did find with eggs, so some possible downsides to eggs are that even though broad terms, they're good, unless you have some sort of egg allergy or you're at risk for diabetes or something like that. Let's see, where's the study? Okay. So this is from a study done 2 months ago, March of 2019. It says half a century of research has now demonstrated that egg intake is not associated with increased heart risk and that it is worth incorporating such product in our diet with regards to its high nutrient content and numerous bioactivities. So one little caveat with that. Although people suffering from metabolic disorders such as diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, and hypertension still need to take caution with their dietary cholesterol intake. So if you're at risk for anything of that nature, maybe limit your intake of dietary cholesterol, even though for the general population, it is healthy and you should not shy away from it. It goes on to say that another concern relates to egg allergy, which is a common infant food allergy with a prevalence estimated to between 1.8 and 2% in children younger than 5 years of age. All right. So it could be obviously not good for children if they have, if they're one of those 2% that could possibly have that egg allergy. But then it goes on to say that most children grow out of their egg allergy within, within 3 years. Okay. And it says that the prevalence of egg allergy decreases with age and usually resolves by school age. So obviously there's going to be individuals that have adverse reactions to food. So ways to determine if that is you is you could just keep a food journal and like write down the things you eat and how you feel afterwards. Obviously, if you eat eggs and you feel like shit afterwards, probably don't eat the eggs. Same thing with any food, right? If it makes you feel that way. Another way to know for sure is if you get like a gut microbiome test or some sort of blood test, that will give you more concrete evidence on that. Let's see, what else on eggs? Oh, one other study that confirms people who are at high risk of CVD, cardiovascular disease, such as those with diabetes or hypertension, need to have caution with dietary cholesterol intake, especially egg intake. So as I stated earlier, although eggs generally considered healthy, if you're at risk for something like diabetes, probably best to limit the egg consumption. All right, now we'll go into a little bit about quality of eggs and different types of eggs. So, eggs that you buy in the store, well, I mean, nowadays you can buy any type of eggs in the store, but when I was growing up, most eggs were, nobody really cared what was in your eggs. Like an egg was an egg, all right? But nowadays we're kind of getting a little bit more hip to the system of how they raise hens and produce eggs. So from what I understand, there's a couple different ways that eggs are produced. There's caged eggs, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised. Okay, so caged eggs, that's exactly what it sounds like. The hens are in tiny little cages, hundreds of them in like these buildings, and they just shit out eggs. Not really shit out, but they just lay the eggs and they drop down this thing and roll onto the conveyor belt, however it works. But they're just cooped up in there all day. Those are the worst type of eggs, obviously for the hen's health and for your own health, depending on the feed, which we will go into a little bit later. Then there's cage-free, which there's not much regulation on cage-free. It could be cage-free, but they're still inside this building, like sleeping in each other's shit and whatnot. And then there's free range, where free range, a little bit tighter standards, but most of the time, from my understanding, is that they're still kept in these barns and they have access to outside pastures. So there might be like a little hole cut out, and they're allowed to go outside and kind of roam around with whatever space that they have. And then there's pasture raised, which is what I encourage people to buy, because pasture raised, there are stricter standards. So I think it's 108 square feet per hen. That constitutes a pasture raised chicken. Pasture raised is good for the chickens because they get to eat their natural diet and they're not cooped up in a cage. They can go explore and run around and be free. It's also good for humans because hens are being fed, not being fed, they're eating their natural diet, which in turn makes the egg healthier. And like I said, we'll go into that a little bit later. And it's also better for the environment, right? Because if the hen is pasture raised, that means that there's grass out there, right? And so grass sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, where if they're in a barn, there's no grass, right? So I always buy pasture raised eggs. All right, so Pat, who I had on the nutrition podcasts a couple episodes ago, we had a little conversation about this, like the difference between caged or cage-free or free-range versus pasture-raised chickens, because I told him I couldn't find any articles on PubMed about the difference between those. And he said that there probably aren't any studies yet because pasture raising is relatively new. Well, I mean, it's not new. That's the way chickens are supposed to be raised. But he said that, and I've found studies to kind of confirm it, that the composition of the yolk just basically depends on the chicken's diet. Stress plays a little bit of a role into that as well. But if the chickens are fed things more like higher in omega-3 content, then the egg in turn is going to have a higher omega-3 content. So you could have a cage-free or free-range chicken who is fed a high-quality diet, and technically the yolk would, or the whole egg would still be as nutritious for you as a pasture-raised chicken. Okay. The only difference being obviously the environmental benefit that you get from pasture raising and the quality of life for the chicken. So this study here says that results on this research showed, this is a study that was published in 2018, by the way, showed that addition of marigold powder to laying hens' feed significantly increased egg lutein content and yolk color. So a couple things to explain. Marigold is a flower, and it's just the extract from that, the powder. And so they would feed that to hens. And lutein is an antioxidant that is really good for human eye health. Okay. And it also affected the yolk color. So if you've heard that yolk color determines whether an egg is good or bad, that might not be entirely true. So you could get a caged or cage-free egg that is more orange or amber in color, which you might have heard might be more healthy, which it could be for you, but for the chicken, if it's caged or cage-free, it's not a happy chicken. But this study did show that, like I said, it had a higher lutein content and a more favorable fatty acid profile in the yolk. So it goes on to say eggs with increased lutein content and favorable profile of fatty acids are a good source of these ingredients in human nutrition because lutein is, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know. Lutein is has a higher I can't talk right now. Higher bioavailability from the egg yolk than you would get from supplements. Okay. Okay. Also, a study from this is the same study from 2 months ago, March of 2019. They say that the fatty acid profile of an egg incorporated in triglycerides and phospholipids directly reflects the composition of fatty acids in the hen's diet. In contrast, the enrichment of the hen's diet with saturated fatty acids has less influence on the yolk's lipid profile. The saturated and unsaturated fatty acid content of the hen's diet can be modified by the inclusion of oil or feedstuffs showing a higher degree of unsaturated fatty acid, such as fish, chia, flax seeds, olive or soy oils. So basically what this is saying is if you modify the hen's diet to include stuff like olive oil, fish, chia seeds, stuff like that, it's going to have a higher omega-3 content versus omega-6s. Whereas if the feed is more based on crappy oils like soy oil, it's going to have a higher omega-6 content. So just because hen is free range or cage free doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy. It all depends on their diet, which, I mean, unless you do research into the company that you're buying the eggs from, it's kind of hard to tell. But like I said, a good way could be from the egg yolk. Again, healthy for humans, not necessarily for the chicken, unless they're pasture raised. So my recommendation, if you choose to eat eggs, which you should, unless, like we stated earlier, you're at risk for diabetes or something like that, to go with a good pasture raised egg. We usually buy Vital Farms, I think is the name. I mean, you can't really go wrong with pasture raised, right? Because then you know that the chicken is eating their natural diet, and so it's going to be good for you, and it's going to be good for the chicken, right? So that's always my recommendation. Or if you know a local farmer who raises their own chickens on a wide open pasture, go with them. Okay, eating locally is better, especially if you know the person. You can see what they're being fed, see how they're being treated, then you know for sure. All right, so I think that's it for eggs. I hope I didn't miss anything. All right, so now going into meat. Now, I'm sure that all of you have heard negatives about meat. Maybe that, I mean, it's bad for you in some way. It causes cancer. It increases your risk for cardiovascular disease, but we already covered that with the cholesterol myth, right? So dietary cholesterol does not have correlation with blood cholesterol, okay? So here are my note cards from, I don't know if you can see that here, if you're watching on video, are my note cards from the speech that I gave in one of my classes on grass-fed meat. And I was actually arguing, well, not arguing, but another girl in the class was giving a speech like pro-vegetarian or pro-vegan. That could be a whole nother podcast on how that is not necessarily healthy for you. So I'll just kind of skim through these. First off, if you guys know Ben Bergeron, I've referenced him in a couple podcasts probably. He said in one of his nutrition podcasts that red meat is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. And it's probably hard to do too much of it, to eat too much of it. So, I mean, I don't really need to say anything else because he has way more credibility than I do. But nevertheless, I will continue. So, the first problem is that there is a widespread failure to distinguish between the sourcing of meat. So sourcing matters. The studies that have been done on meat that demonize the meat industry usually come from studies that are from feedlot cows, like cows that are in these buildings or outside, but they're all crammed together and fed like corn or soy-based feeds, okay? No grass. if you've driven up the 5 or down the 5, whichever way you're going in California, you've probably seen and smelled the cows. That would be an example of a feedlot. Okay. So grass-fed meat and grain-fed meat are two completely different things. When people demonize the meat industry, they're referring to feedlots. So Nora Gedgridis, she's a best-selling author and nutritional consultant. This is a quote from her. Roughly 97% of all the meat produced today is produced in these feedlots, which is very unfortunate. So why are feedlots bad? Well, first off, it's wrong from the moral standpoint because it's unhealthy for the cows, right? If you're a cow, would you rather be on this wide open pasture or laying in your own shit, eating stuff that your body's not meant to process, right? I mean, the choice is pretty easy. So they keep them in these confined stalls with limited space, and cows aren't meant to be fed grains, right? So cattle are basically designed to eat one thing and one thing only, and that's fresh, green grass. So why are we feeding them grains? Because it's good for business. So Ryan Fisher, he's a gym owner and former CrossFit athlete, and he also has a podcast. It's on the Shrugged Collective called Real Chalk. Go check that out. On one of his nutrition podcasts, he says that grains cause massive amounts of inflammation in the cow, which in turn creates more meat, which means more product for the farmers to sell. So the goal of the farmer is to get the cow as big as possible. And the way to get them as big as possible is to create massive amounts of inflammation by feeding them grain. Okay, it fattens them up. To maximize growth, cows are often given drugs such as antibiotics and growth hormones. So cows cannot live longer than about 6 months on this diet. The large amount of inflammation causes them to die. Cows that are fed grains are also less nutritious. According to Michael Pollan, he should need no introduction. Go look him up. I will introduce him anyway. He's the author of numerous books, including In Defense of Food. He says that meat used to be a good source of omega-3s because cows consumed green leafy grass, but now the animals we raise for food are mainly fed corn and soy, so they get fewer omega-3s. Grass-fed beef contains up to 5 times more omega-3 fatty acids, as grain-fed beef is also higher in vitamins A and E. So how can we distinguish between grass-fed and grain-fed meat? You have to pay attention to the packaging that it's in. So it'll say one of 3 things. It'll either say grass-fed and grass-finished, or 100% grass-fed, or it just won't say anything. So that's probably the meat that you're used to buying. You just go and pick out whatever meat you want from the deli section. I can almost guarantee that that's not grass-fed. So next time you go, look at the packaging. If it says just grass-fed, it's probably not what you're looking for. So their companies are allowed to say that meat is grass-fed because, so here's the life of a cow. For their first 6 to 8 months of their life, cows are raised on traditional pastures where they roam free and eat grass. After that, they're moved to feedlots where for the next 6 months of their life, they're fed these crappy feeds that fatten them up, and then they die because they can't live longer than that. So because of the fact that they were first raised on a green pasture allows the companies to be able to say that they were grass-fed, which is extremely unfortunate and sad that our marketing agency allows that. So ways to combat that. Make sure that it says 100% grass-fed or grass-fed and finished. This means, so the finished means that they were raised grass-fed and then they were finished grass-fed. So all the way up until the day they were slaughtered, they were eating grass. All right. So let's see. I went over that. All right. And it also costs more. So a package that says grass-fed, it'll be more expensive than the regular meat, even though you're probably paying for the exact same product. So save money. Stay away from that. All right. We have been led to believe that red meat is bad for your health, that it can lead to cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, diabetes, and even cancer. But that is not entirely true. Most studies that link red meat to these health issues were observational. This means that they can detect associations between two things, aka red meat, and health risks, but cannot prove causation. They are mostly based off of food frequency questionnaires, which means people are supposed to remember what they have eaten in the past and expected not to lie about it. So if I asked you, what did you eat for dinner the past 2 weeks, right? You're probably not going to get everything 100% correct. You might exaggerate a little bit or leave some things out, okay? And that's what these studies are based on. They're observational. It's impossible to draw strong conclusions from observational studies because, again, it's based on the person's memory and whether they're lying or not. The only way to establish true cause and effect is to perform randomized controlled trials, which is considered the gold standard in scientific studies. It's always a bad idea to make health decisions based on observational studies alone. In fact, there are many cases in history where randomized controlled trials ended up showing the exact opposite effect of the observational study. In addition, most of the studies focused on processed red meat, meaning it was either smoked, cured, treated with nitrates, preservatives, and various chemicals. These include things like sausage, almost any deli meat, so things like salami, ham, stuff like that. Many studies have linked processed red meat with negative health effects. However, no association has been found in unprocessed red meat. So, guys, I want you to understand this. The studies that have linked red meat to negative health effects, first off, were observational studies. Second off, they focused on processed red meat, right? Again, things like hot dog, sausage, salami, ham, okay? Most people can probably agree that that's the stuff that we shouldn't be eating because it was altered in some way, all right? No studies have shown any correlation between unprocessed red meat and negative health effects, okay? According to Michael Pollan, there are people who demonize meat, but there is no reason to. Meat is healthy food that humans have been eating for a very long time, which is true. Think of way back in the days when people looked like me, long beard, hairy all over, carried spears, ran around stabbing saber-toothed tigers. I mean, they didn't just do that for fun. They were probably eating them. I imagine what a saber-toothed tiger would taste like. I don't know. Probably be pretty cool. Anyways, continuing. Our digestive systems are obviously well equipped to handle it if we've been eating it for literally the entirety of our lives. Well, not our lives, but human evolution. Traditional populations like the Maasai have eaten much more red meat than the average Westerner, but remained in excellent health. Reason being because they don't have access to any processed red meat, right? They just kill it, cook it up on the fire, and eat it. Red meat is one of the most nutritious foods you can eat, as I said. It is loaded with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and various other nutrients that can have profound impacts on health, many of which are not found in plant sources, things like vitamin B12 and bioavailable iron and creatine, right? Creatine, I might do a whole podcast on creatine because it's so amazing. I won't cover that much into it right now. So it's clear that grass-fed and finished meat is good for your health, but what about the environment? So another reason that people don't eat red meat is because they have heard of its supposed environmental impacts. However, 100% grass-fed meat actually improves our environment. So grass plays a crucial role in the uptake of carbon dioxide. Same thing I said with the pasture-raised chickens, right? According to Kat Kerlin in an article she wrote about a 2018 study done by UC Davis, unlike trees, grass stores most of its carbon underground. So when wildfires occur, all the carbon that was stored in the trees goes back into the atmosphere, while most of the carbon taken up by grass is stored in the roots underground. So in areas more prone to wildfires, California especially, grass may be a better option. According to Pollock Das, the lead author of the study, he says that grasslands store more carbon than forests because they are impacted less by droughts and wildfires. According to another 2018 study published in Agricultural Systems, even though grass-fed cows produce more carbon dioxide than feedlot cows, the vast amount of grasslands required for grass-fed farming acts as a carbon sink. This means that they suck up more carbon than the cows produce. All right. It is for that reason that Joel Slatin, he's a holistic farmer and author of numerous farming books, says that if every farm in the world, so guys, listen to this is a crazy statistic. If every farm in the world would do this, we could sequester all the carbon that has been emitted since the beginning of the industrial age in 10 years. Now, I don't know where he got that data or whether it's true or not, but I mean, it's worth a try, right? If we switch every farm to a grass-fed farm, first off, it's better for the cows, it's better for our health, and it's better for the environment. So why wouldn't we do it? I mean, it's just business. It's cheaper to raise cows on feedlots. That's the unfortunate part of this. He says that this way of farming, the pasture raising, is not only sustainable, but it's actually regenerative. It allows the grass time to grow and recoup. The role of the herbivore in nature is actually to prune the grass. This is what builds soil, hydrates the landscape, and actually sequesters carbon. Nora Gedgrides agrees. She says that what people don't understand is that everything really hinges on restoring natural systems. So what that means is bringing everything back to the way things were, right? So cows weren't always raised on feedlots. They were out eating grass, doing whatever the hell cows do. Sleep and, I don't know, moo. This is how nature worked before we started industrializing everything. It's not the animal's fault. He says that prior to modern times, there were actually more pounds of animals than we have today, even with factory farms. Think about like way back before all the bison disappeared. There were literally millions of bison just roaming. So if it was the animal's fault for producing carbon dioxide, why wasn't there global warming way back then? Why is it only coming now? Because it's not the animal's fault. It's the way they're raised. He questions that if it's the animals creating climate change, why didn't it happen then? It's not the animals, it's how they're managed. What causes this misunderstanding? I believe that it's lack of knowledge and false information, and I believe that it's the cause of all the confusion. So what is the solution? The solution is to support grass-fed meat, 100% grass-fed meat, by making that the only thing that you buy, right? If everybody chooses to only buy grass-fed meat and pasture-raised eggs, eventually, hopefully, the industry will start to realize that, oh shit, like maybe we should switch our practices to only pasture raising, right? Because it's better for the environment, it's better for the animals, it's better for our health. So the only downside is that they would be making less money, right? It's a shame that it comes to that, but that's the way the world works. Everybody loves money. All right, so I hope you guys got something from this podcast. To sum it up, buy pasture-raised eggs / chicken and buy 100% grass-fed meat. And the only reason to limit your intake of those would be if you're at risk for diabetes or have some sort of adverse reaction to one of those foods. But again, that's on an individual basis. So as I stated in the beginning, all this information is free online. Go to PubMed. You can look it all up. Don't believe some news flash you see. Oh my God, chickens cause cancer. Like, no, go look it up. Do your own research. And again, a fantastic resource that I recommend is my good friend Holly. You can follow her on Instagram at healthwithholly0106, and the link to her blog is on there. The article that I used to reference here, The Cholesterol Conundrum, is coming out today, if you're listening to it on the day that this podcast comes out, which is Monday. So yeah, I hope you guys listen to this information and don't just say I'm blowing things out of my ass or whatever, because like I said, you guys can find this information too. Please share this information with anybody who isn't eating meat because of the environmental impact, because of the supposed health impact. Encourage them to look up their own information, because they're probably not going to believe me, something I'm saying. They're probably going to want to do their own research. So if you are curious to any of the studies that I used, you can send me a message on Instagram. I will be happy to share all this information. That's pretty much it. If there's no podcast next week, it's because I'm taking a little vacation. We're doing a little road trip to wherever we want. Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Monterey, San Luis Obispo. Kind of just cruising. One little last hurrah before I leave for Saudi Arabia. So I got the final paper that I was waiting for. I sent it all up to be approved, and now I'm just waiting for the visa. So should be a couple of weeks, unless something crazy happens. They need something else. I don't know. It's been a long process, but thank you guys for all your support so far. And the stickers have been released. So if you want a Captain's Lifestyle sticker, message me on Instagram. If you're at the gym, come up to me. I'll give you one. Or you can order them on the Captain's Lifestyle website. That's pretty much it. Cheers. All right. This episode is over. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If you enjoyed it, please share it with someone else who you think can benefit from it. And if you feel so inclined to like, subscribe, and write me a review, I would appreciate that greatly. It truly helps a lot. Helps me spread this message to other people so they can improve their lives. And if you haven't already, check out the other episodes of the Captain's Lifestyle podcast. And if you are interested in learning more about the Captain's Lifestyle or what I'm up to, head over to thecaptainslifestyle.com or follow me on Instagram at 6captainmorgan9. And don't forget, live the Captain's Lifestyle.